Hey everyone, tonight we begin not on a battlefield, but in a locked infirmary deep inside a Nazi camp. Here, the air reeks of sweat and chemicals, and freedom has already been stripped away. You've heard of the gas chambers, the mass graves, the horrors of Auschwitz, but the truth. Some prisoners were chosen for something even more nightmarish, to become human test tubes for the Reich's miracle drug, methamphetamine. This isn't just another story of World War II. It's about veins flooded with poison, hallucinations of burning families, and men turned into staggering husks while SS doctors timed their deaths with stopwatches. It's the betrayal of science, survival reduced to an experiment, and human dignity crushed under the weight of cruelty masquerading as progress. If exposing the darkest corners of history helps you see the past with sharper eyes, please like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what moment in your life has felt like a battle you weren't sure you'd survive? Now, draw the curtains, steady your breath, and step with me into the lab where death didn't come by bullet, but by injection. You find yourself in a space that attempts to mimic sterility, yet fails profoundly. The air is thick, an unsettling blend of antiseptic and the raw, metallic tang of fear. This isn't the crude, muddy brutality of the Campyard, nor the chilling finality of the gas chambers. No, this is different. This is a clinic, they call it. A sterile facade designed to mask an even deeper depravity. Along the stark white walls, you see them. Dozens of glass syringes, perfectly aligned, glinting under the dim, bare bulbs that hum overhead. Each one is a silent promise of a waking nightmare, filled with a substance called Pervitin, the Reich's supposed miracle drug. Your stomach clenches, a constant, gnawing emptiness that has been your companion for what feels like an eternity. Your bones ache from the perpetual cold, a cold that seeps into your very marrow. You are tied to a hard, wooden chair, the ropes biting into your already chafed wrists and ankles, ensuring that escape is not merely improbable, but impossible, around you. Other prisoners sit in similar confinement, their faces gaunt, eyes wide with a shared, unspoken terror. You gaze at the murky vials lined up on a metal cart, the liquid inside swirling like a captive storm. It seems innocuous enough, a pale yellow or clear liquid, but you know its true nature. A tall SS guard, his uniform immaculately pressed despite the grime of the camp, approaches. A cruel smirk plays on his lips, a chilling contrast to the calculated precision of his movements. He pauses before you, his gaze cold and assessing, a predator observing its prey. "Today," he says, his voice devoid of warmth, a chilling whisper that cuts through the silence. "Today, you'll serve the Reich's great science." Each word is a hammer blow, sealing your fate. Then comes the cold, sharp prick, a sudden intrusion as the needle pierces your skin. You feel the foreign substance flood your veins, a burning rush that travels swiftly through your bloodstream. Your heart, already weakened by starvation and constant fear, begins to pound, not in a steady rhythm, but a furious, erratic drum against your ribs. It accelerates, faster and faster, a frantic race to an unknown destination. Sweat breaks out on your brow, a cold clamminess that trickles down your temples and neck. You can feel your pulse throbbing at your wrists, in your throat, a living thing fighting to escape. A gasp escapes your lips, then another, around you. The air fills with sounds, not words, but raw, primal screams. You see others, their eyes rolling back into their heads, bodies convulsing against the restraints. The doctors, dressed in their white coats, move with an unsettling calm. They do not intervene. They do not comfort. Instead, they scribble notes on clipboards, their pens scratching methodically, meticulously recording every spasm, every sound, every agonizing detail of this perverse experiment. Their faces are blank, devoid of empathy, their focus entirely on the data they are collecting. This is not healing. This is not medicine. This is something far more sinister, the prologue to an execution, meticulously disguised as the relentless pursuit of science. And you are merely a living, breathing component in their monstrous equation, awaiting the next phase of this unholy process. The first injection wears off, or perhaps it morphs into something even more insidious. You are no longer in the clinic chair, but now confined to a dark, cramped cell, its walls rough and cold against your back. The light, when it comes, is a cruel flicker from a single, high window, casting shifting shadows that play tricks on your weary mind. Here, the mandate is simple, yet brutal. You must stand, hour after hour. Your legs scream in protest. Your knees threaten to buckle. Your body yearns for the smallest respite, the blissful oblivion of sleep. But there is no sleep. Sleep is forbidden. You sway. You totter. You struggle to maintain your balance, your vision blurring at the edges. The guards observe from a small peephole, their eyes like cold, distant stars, watching your every faltering movement. Each time your body can no longer sustain itself, each time you collapse, falling with a dull thud to the concrete floor, a new horror awaits. A guard enters, his boots heavy on the ground, and a fresh syringe appears. Another injection. The burning rush floods your veins once more, jolting you awake inside what feels like a living nightmare. Your heart races, the fatigue still heavy in your limbs, yet your mind is forcibly wrenched into a state of hyper-alertness, a cruel mockery of wakefulness. Your eyes strain in the darkness, searching for a sign, a flicker of hope. But there is only the oppressive gloom and the relentless mandate to remain standing. The hours stretch into an eternity, days blurring into a ceaseless cycle of forced wakefulness. You forget what day it is, how long you've been in this cell. Your very sense of self begins to fray at the edges. Sleep deprivation stretches into an agony beyond comprehension. Your mind, desperate for rest, begins to conjure visions. At first, they are fleeting, shadowy figures, whispers at the edge of your hearing. Then, they grow more vivid, more terrifying. You see your family, their faces clear as day, but they are engulfed in flames, their silent screams echoing in the cavern of your skull. You hear phantom screams emanating from the cold stone walls, the cries of those who came before you, those who broke under this unbearable pressure. These are not dreams. They are waking nightmares, indistinguishable from reality. The line between what is real and what is hallucination dissolves, leaving you adrift in a sea of terror. Driven to the brink of madness, some prisoners, you hear later, clawed at their own skin, tearing at their flesh, in a desperate attempt to escape the torment within. Others, in a horrifying display of self-destruction, smashed their heads against the unyielding stone walls, seeking any form of oblivion, any release from the relentless torment. You watch yourself in your mind's eye, your own hands trembling, your eyes darting, your breath coming in ragged gasps. The SS officers, those architects of your suffering, observe all of this with a chilling detachment. They sit behind their desks, clipboards in hand, meticulously recording every twitch, every shriek, every act of desperation. To them, this is not human suffering. It is a grotesque theatrical performance, a macabre experiment in endurance. And you are simply a subject, an unwilling actor on their stage of cruelty. Your humanity is systematically stripped away, piece by agonizing piece, under the cold, unfeeling gaze of your captors. The confinement of the cell, as horrifying as it was only a prelude. The experiment soon transcended the clinical environment, spilling out into the harsh reality of the Campyard. It began to feel less like a scientific endeavor and more like a series of sadistic games, a macabre circus designed for the entertainment and data collection of your tormentors. One morning, under a sky that seemed perpetually gray, you and others who had endured the Pervitin injections were herded together. Your bodies, already ravaged by starvation and the chemical onslaught, felt like husks, barely obeying the commands of your fractured mind. Yet, another dose of the drug coursed through your veins, a cruel spark that ignited a frantic, unnatural energy within you, pushing your body beyond its breaking point. You were then driven into laps around the vast, muddy yard, a makeshift racetrack of despair. The ground was uneven, pocked with frozen divots in colder months, or churned into thick mud during the rains. Each step was a monumental effort, your feet dragging, your lungs burning with every gasping breath. But the running was not enough. To increase the load, the SS guards, their faces contorted in expressions of amusement and cold observation, ordered you to haul heavy sandbags. These weren't mere sacks. They weighed approximately 88 pounds each, a crushing burden for bodies already stripped to skin and bone. You hoisted the coarse canvas over your shoulders, the weight digging into your flesh, threatening to pull you down with every stumbling stride. As you moved, or rather, staggered, the guards barked orders, forcing you to chant empty, hollow slogans of the Reich, their words a mocking counterpoint to your inner torment. Heil victory, they demanded. Long live the Führer. Your voice, when it emerged, was a rasp, barely audible above the relentless pounding of your own heart. Your mind, already a swirling kaleidoscope of hallucinations and exhaustion, struggled to form coherent thoughts. The drug pushed you forward, an invisible force compelling your weakened muscles. But it was a fleeting, destructive energy. Collapse was not an option. It was a failure with dire consequences. If your legs gave out, if the weight became too much, a heavy boot would immediately connect with your ribs, sending a searing pain through your emaciated frame. And for some, for the unlucky ones whose bodies simply refused to go on, it meant a bullet to the head, a swift, brutal end to their suffering, an end you both feared and, in your darkest moments, secretly envied. You watched as others around you stumbled, fell, and were either brutalized back into motion or simply extinguished. The survivors, you included, staggered forward, eyes crimson with burst capillaries, faces twisted into masks of agony and terror. Your muscles screamed, your head throbbed, and the world spun in a dizzying haze. Yet, you kept moving, propelled by a primal instinct to survive one more moment. The SS guards, far from being repulsed by this spectacle, continued their macabre duties with chilling indifference. They recorded data, their pens scratching on clipboards, meticulously noting the endurance, the collapse times, the physiological responses of each human subject. They laughed, their callous guffaws echoing across the desolate yard, treating this human suffering as if they were observing a bizarre circus act, a grotesque form of entertainment, rather than the systematic destruction of human lives. Even amidst the daily grind of forced labor and chemical torment, there was another, more insidious layer of dread that permeated the camp's existence: the selections. These were not random acts of violence, but coldly calculated assessments. A brutal form of triage that determined who would live a little longer and who would be condemned to immediate oblivion. One morning, the command came, chilling the blood in your veins. Everyone to the assembly yard. A collective gasp rippled through the barracks, quickly suppressed by the omnipresent fear. You knew what this meant. This was the human slaughterhouse, the moment when life and death hung in the balance, decided by the flick of a finger, a nod of a head. The SS guards, with their usual brutal efficiency, gathered the prisoners, pushing and shoving you into lines. You stood shoulder to shoulder, a sea of emaciated bodies, each one a testament to the systematic deprivation you endured. Doctors, not the kind who offered healing, but rather those wielding the power of life and death, moved along the lines. They weighed you, their hands cold and impersonal as they checked your skeletal frame. They tagged you, a number scribbled onto a piece of paper pinned to your tattered uniform, reducing you from a person to a mere statistic, a piece of inventory. It felt as if you were cattle, awaiting inspection before being sent to the butcher. Your heart hammered against your ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Each beat a silent prayer for anonymity, for invisibility. The inspection was swift and brutal. The old, their bodies stooped and fragile, their faces etched with the lines of a life lived and now brutally cut short, were separated. The sick, those whose coughing fits were too frequent, whose fevers were too high, whose bodies simply could no longer fight, were also pulled aside. There was no compassion, no pity in the eyes of the SS. These individuals, deemed unfit for even the most degrading labor or the most monstrous experiments, were sent straight to the gas chambers. Their fate was sealed, a swift, albeit agonizing, end to their suffering. You watched, your breath catching in your throat, as the line for the unfit grew, each step taken by those in it a journey toward an unimaginable horror. But for you, and for those like you, the fit ones, the seemingly healthier ones, a different, perhaps even more terrifying fate awaited. You were not sent to the gas chambers. Not yet. Instead, you were condemned to become living test subjects for the ongoing methamphetamine experiments. Selection. You realized with a sickening lurch in your gut. Wasn't survival in the traditional sense. It was a prolonged death sentence, a horrifying deferral of the inevitable, where each breath drawn was merely another moment to endure a living hell. Terror spread through the ranks, a palpable wave of silent dread. No one, absolutely no one, wanted their name called for these selections to be chosen in this place. In this abyss of human cruelty, meant only one thing: you were irrevocably doomed, marked for an agonizing end in the service of their twisted science. Your life reduced to a series of observations before your ultimate, agonizing expiration. Amidst the relentless daily terror, certain moments, certain individuals, become etched into the memory, stark and unyielding. You remember one such instance, a particular prisoner, his name now lost to the winds of history, yet his final agony remains vivid. He was brought into a sterile-looking room, reminiscent of the clinic where your own journey into this nightmare began. His face was a mask of utter exhaustion and profound fear, his eyes sunken and vacant, yet betraying a desperate flicker of self-awareness. You watched, along with other inmates, our collective breath held tight in our chests as he was forced to swallow. Not a single dose, not a customary injection, but a horrifying quantity, 50 Pervitin tablets, 50 tiny white pills, each a concentrated dose of the poison that had already ravaged your own body, forced down his throat one after another. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. His body convulsed violently, as if a lightning bolt had struck him from within. His heart, already weak from years of starvation and brutal treatment, began to thunder, not just beat, but explode against his ribs like an out-of-control drum. Each beat a jarring impact that seemed to shake the very foundations of the room. You could almost feel the vibrations in your own chest. He writhed in his chair, muscles spasming uncontrollably, a horrifying dance of agony. His eyes rolled back, revealing only the whites, and a guttural moan, half choke, half scream, escaped his lips. His body arched, then slumped, then arched again, a puppet on invisible, agonizing strings. The SS doctors, those men in white coats who had long since discarded any semblance of their Hippocratic oath, observed him with a chilling precision that bordered on the macabre. They did not attempt to alleviate his suffering. They did not offer a drop of water or a word of comfort. Instead, they stood by, clipboards in hand, their eyes fixed on their stopwatches. They timed his death. Every spasm, every shudder, every agonizing twitch was meticulously noted, categorized, and recorded. His final moments were not a tragedy, but a data point, a crucial piece of information for their horrifying research. His pain was not an alarm, but a measurable variable. The silence in the room, save for the man's gasps and the doctor's quiet murmurs, was deafening, punctuated only by the rhythmic clicking of the stopwatches. You, along with the other inmates who bore witness to this slow, deliberate extinguishing of a life, felt a cold dread settle in your stomach. Each one of you knew, with a horrifying certainty, that you were next in line. This man's agonizing end was not just an observation. It was a morbid preview of your own potential fate. His last breaths, his final convulsions, became statistics on a clipboard, a series of numbers and observations that would eventually be filed away in some dark archive. In that moment, his humanity was completely erased, reduced to that of an insect, a specimen under a magnifying glass, examined and dissected in the most brutal way imaginable. His life, his suffering, his very existence served only one purpose: to contribute to the monstrous, twisted science of the Third Reich. A stark reminder that in this place, life held no inherent value, only utility for its perpetrators. The Pervitin alone was a torment beyond imagining. But the SS doctors, in their relentless pursuit of scientific progress, did not stop there. Their ambition, or perhaps their depravity, led them to concoct even more sinister formulations. Desperate combinations designed to push the human body and mind to absolute breaking points. You witnessed these mad mixtures, these unholy cocktails, administered to fellow prisoners, each combination promising a new dimension of horror. One of the most common and devastating mixtures was Pervitin combined with alcohol. The result was not intoxication in the traditional sense, but something far more disturbing. The prisoners became like hollowed-out automatons, shambling across the campyard like zombies. Their movements were erratic, their eyes glazed over, devoid of any spark of recognition or humanity. They stumbled, they fell, their bodies jerking with involuntary spasms, their minds utterly lost in a chemical fog that obliterated thought and feeling, replacing it with a terrifying, vacant obedience. Another terrifying concoction involved Pervitin mixed with morphine. This created a paradoxical state, a horrifying limbo between wakefulness and oblivion. The men would become half awake, half comatose wrecks, trapped in a twilight world. Their bodies would lie still for hours, breathing shallowly, their minds perhaps drifting in a haze of drugged unconsciousness, only to be jolted back to a tormented semi-awareness by another dose of the stimulant. They were neither truly alive nor truly dead, their existence reduced to a miserable, fluctuating state of chemical imbalance. Their faces were often slack, their mouths agape, sometimes drooling, their forms a stark testament to the complete obliteration of personality and will. And then there was the systematic sleep deprivation, often combined with these potent drugs. Some prisoners were kept awake for a week straight, the Pervitin forcing their bodies to remain upright, their minds to remain alert, even as every fiber of their being screamed for rest. The effects were devastating. After days of forced wakefulness, their bodies would simply give out, collapsing like felled trees, their frames hitting the ground with a soft yet final-sounding thud. But even then, the torment wasn't over. Some would regain a terrifying, manic energy, their laughter echoing hollowly through the barracks, a sound devoid of joy, filled instead with a desperate, hysterical edge. You would hear stories of men giggling manically, their eyes wild and unfocused, only to suddenly begin vomiting blood, their internal systems ravaged by the chemical assault and the relentless exhaustion. The outcomes of these mad mixtures were tragically predictable. For those subjected to these extreme experiments, the end was always the same: 100% death, or permanent, irreversible ruin. Their nervous systems were shattered, their minds broken, their bodies ravaged beyond any hope of recovery. Yet, in their warped worldview, the SS doctors meticulously documented these agonizing results, labeling them as scientific progress. Each death, each permanent disability, was simply another data point, another step forward in their dark, perverse research. To them, the suffering was irrelevant, only the results mattered. You witnessed this utter disregard for human life, this cold, clinical path to destruction, knowing that each new mixture, each new experiment, brought you closer to the same inevitable fate. A fate determined by men who saw you not as a human being, but as a dispensable tool for their monstrous ambitions. The rhythm of existence within the camp, for those designated as test subjects, was governed by a relentless, suffocating fear. It was not merely the fear of the gas chambers or the brutal physical labor, but a more insidious terror, the constant dread of being summoned. Each morning, as the weak light of dawn barely pierced the barracks, you awoke with a jolt, your heart leaping into your throat, listening intently for the sound of boots, for the shouted name, for the command that would separate you from the relative safety of the collective. This daily anticipation, this perpetual state of heightened anxiety, gnawed at your soul. A constant, dull ache that overshadowed every other sensation. Your body, even without the immediate effects of an injection, became a testament to this torment. Your eyes, once bright and full of life, were now hollow and deeply sunken, shadowed by perpetual exhaustion and the terror that resided within. Your hands, once capable and steady, trembled incessantly, a nervous tremor that was beyond your control, a physical manifestation of your shattered nervous system. Every movement was slow, deliberate, as if your limbs were no longer entirely your own. Your skin, stretched taut over your skeletal frame, was pale and clammy, cold to the touch. You were a walking ghost, haunted by the specter of the next experiment, the next dose of poison. Sleep, which should have been a refuge, became yet another source of dread. You longed for it, craved it with every fiber of your being. But it was a dangerous luxury. To fall into a deep slumber meant risking another injection, a rude awakening that would plunge you back into the waking nightmare of forced wakefulness or chemical torment. So, you slept fitfully, if at all, your mind racing, your senses alert to the smallest sound, prepared to be roused at any moment for another round of their twisted science. The exhaustion was profound, a heavy cloak that draped itself over your every thought and action. Yet sleep remained elusive, tainted by the memory of previous awakenings. Around you, your fellow prisoners, those who had not yet been chosen, or those awaiting their next summons, watched helplessly, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and profound sorrow, followed your every move. Whispered prayers, barely audible, would sometimes reach your ears, a desperate plea for mercy, for an end to the suffering, not just for you, but for all of them. These were silent acknowledgments of your shared plight, a fragile bond forged in the crucible of unimaginable cruelty. Some, in a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable, would feign illness, hoping that a fever or a persistent cough might spare them from the next round of experiments. But you knew, deep down, that such strategies were futile. In this death camp, in this place where humanity had been utterly discarded, no one, absolutely no one, escaped their grim, predetermined fate. Each day was merely a countdown, a slow, agonizing march toward an end that was always just beyond the horizon, yet ever present in your mind. Amidst the open brutality and overt experimentation, there was another layer to the SS doctor's perverse agenda, meticulous, almost obsessive documentation. To them, you and your fellow prisoners were not merely living beings. You were living medical data. Every heartbeat, every labored breath, every convulsion, every agonizing scream was meticulously logged, transcribed into sterile reports. The SS doctors, with their chilling detachment, treated each of you as a walking, breathing data point, a source of information to be extracted, categorized, and analyzed. They charted your weight loss, the changes in your pulse rate, the duration of your forced wakefulness, the precise time of your collapse, and ultimately, the moment of your death. Every detail, no matter how minute, was deemed significant. These reports were not simply kept within the confines of the camp's infirmary. They were funneled directly to the highest echelons of the Wehrmacht and SS High Command, to the architects of the war machine, to those who sought to weaponize every aspect of human endurance. The findings, derived from your suffering, were intended to inform military strategy, to create a super soldier, an unfeeling machine capable of endless vigilance and tireless combat. The suffering inflicted upon you was not merely gratuitous. It had a perverse, calculated purpose in their monstrous scheme. You were a footnote in their grim ledger of destruction, your agony serving a greater, horrific ambition. As the war inevitably drew to a close, and the Allied forces closed in, the true scale of these atrocities began to emerge. With the fall of the Third Reich, the victorious Americans and Soviets launched a frantic scramble. Their goal to seize these very secret files, the meticulous records of unspeakable human experimentation. Operation Paperclip and similar covert efforts saw teams scouring ruined buildings, interrogating captured personnel, desperate to get their hands on this invaluable, albeit morally tainted, data. The information, garnered through such horrific means, was considered a prize, a trove of knowledge that could potentially give them an edge in the unfolding Cold War. What happened next is a quiet, unsettling twist in the tapestry of history. While some of the more overtly barbaric details were suppressed or hidden, certain aspects of the data, the physiological responses, the endurance statistics, were quietly, almost imperceptibly, reused in modern pharmacology. The very drugs that contributed to your agony, or the scientific principles gleaned from your torment, found their way into legitimate research, into the development of stimulants and other compounds. The shadow of the death camps, the blood of its victims, subtly, insidiously, tainted humanity's broader scientific endeavors. The pursuit of knowledge, in this instance, had been built on a foundation of unimaginable suffering, leaving an indelible stain on the very fabric of human science. A chilling legacy that persists in the quiet corners of pharmaceutical research and military applications, echoing the screams that were once meticulously recorded. For most who endured the horrors of the meth experiments, the ultimate release came not with liberation, but with death. Their bodies, their minds, simply gave out, ravaged beyond repair by the relentless chemical assault, the starvation, and the profound psychological torment. Their names are lost to time, their stories swallowed by the vast, anonymous statistics of the Holocaust. Yet, a handful, a mere fraction of those subjected to the miracle drug, miraculously stumbled into liberation. They emerged from the gates of hell, not triumphant, but broken, their spirits shattered, their bodies ravaged, walking specters of their former selves. Their nervous systems were utterly destroyed, fried by the constant overstimulation and subsequent crashes. They suffered from uncontrollable tremors, persistent insomnia, debilitating anxiety, and a host of other neurological disorders that would haunt them for the rest of their shortened lives. Beyond the physical damage, many were addicted to the very substance that had been forced upon them, a cruel irony that bound them to their tormentors even after the chains were broken. The drug had rewired their brains, creating a dependency that recovery, for many, seemed an impossible dream. They carried the chemical scars deep within their biology, a permanent reminder of their time as human test tubes. One survivor, his voice a ghost from the past, once recalled, "Years after the war, I don't remember Liberation Day, not the joy or the relief. I only remember my heart exploding from meth." This poignant statement encapsulates the profound and lasting trauma. For him, the end of the war was not a moment of freedom, but merely a continuation of his internal agony, a heart still racing from phantom doses, a mind still trapped in the chemical haze. The physical liberation was a hollow victory when the mind and body remained enslaved by the after effects of their captivity. The memories, the horrific visions, the physical sensations of the drug became their new prison, a cell from which there was no escape. The weight of these memories, the unbearable burden of what they had witnessed and endured, proved too heavy for many. A tragic number of these survivors, having escaped the gas chambers and the laboratories, chose to end their own lives in the years following the war, unable to reconcile the horrors of their past with the fragile promise of a future. They sought the only true peace they believed was available to them: their personal tragedies, each a universe of pain and suffering, were often buried beneath cold statistics. Another line in the medical records, another entry in the long list of post-war casualties. But behind each number, you must remember, was a life shattered, a human spirit irrevocably broken, a story of profound suffering that echoes silently through the quiet halls of history. A testament to the fact that some wounds, especially those inflicted by such deliberate cruelty, never truly heal. The story of Pervitin, the Reich's miracle drug, does not end with the fall of the Nazi regime. Its influence, its dark legacy, lingered, twisting into new forms, finding new applications long after the death camps were liberated. Pervitin itself did not vanish into obscurity. It lived on, albeit often under different names, as a potent post-war stimulant. Its chemical structure, its ability to suppress fatigue and enhance performance, was too useful to simply discard. The shadow of its origin might have been hidden, but the drug itself continued its insidious journey through the decades. Quietly, away from public scrutiny, militaries worldwide began to investigate and test its effects, or the effects of similar compounds, on their own troops. The desire for a soldier who could fight longer, remain vigilant for days without sleep, or push through the fog of exhaustion, was a powerful motivator. The very data gathered from the suffering of prisoners in Nazi labs, or at least the knowledge that such effects were possible, informed these clandestine programs. The ethical boundaries, so brutally crossed in the camps, were once again blurred, stretched, and sometimes outright ignored in the name of national security or military advantage. The ghost of Nazi science, the echoes of your own torment, continued to shape the direction of military pharmacology, an unsettling truth hidden in plain sight. This raises a profound and disturbing ethical question, one that continues to resonate. Can science, true progress, ever truly be built upon a foundation of such unspeakable atrocities? Can knowledge gained through the deliberate dehumanization and torture of human beings ever be considered untainted, worthy of pursuit or application? The very act of utilizing such data, even in different contexts, carries with it the moral stain of its origins. It creates a chilling precedent, a quiet normalization of the idea that the ends might sometimes justify the most barbaric means. The Nazi crimes were not entirely buried with the collapse of the Third Reich. They echo, subtly yet persistently, in modern research, in the quiet development of performance-enhancing drugs, in the discussions around human limits and how to push them. The nameless victims of these experiments, those whose lives were reduced to data points and whose agonies fueled a twisted scientific quest, remain largely unremembered by the broader world. Their faces, their stories, are lost, absorbed into the chilling efficiency of the Reich's documentation. Pervitin and the dark science it represented didn't just kill in the death camps. It left a lasting, indelible stain on the entire endeavor of human science. A constant, silent reminder of the profound dangers when ethical boundaries are not merely crossed, but utterly annihilated in the relentless, unfeeling pursuit of knowledge. You might imagine a scene of stark, unyielding evil. Figures cloaked in shadows, their faces etched with a monstrousness that defies description. Yet, as you gaze upon faded photographs, perhaps from an album tucked away in some forgotten corner of history, you find something profoundly unsettling in its very ordinariness. You see them, the men in their dark uniforms. But these are not moments of grim duty. No, these are snapshots of what appears, on the surface, to be a quiet afternoon. A picnic, perhaps, by a placid lake, or a gathering in a garden where sunlight filters through leaves. You notice their smiles, easy and unforced, as if sharing a joke that holds no malice. The clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation, the faint scent of pipe tobacco or summer blossoms. These are the mundane details that greet your senses. These are members of the SS, the very personnel entrusted with the machinery of death at places like Sobibor and Auschwitz. Captured in moments off duty, you observe them, seemingly normal, laughing, relaxing, engaged in the simple pleasures of life, much like anyone you might encounter on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The profound discomfort you feel arises from this stark contradiction, the casual leisure, the genuine smiles, the innocent-looking photographs, framed against the backdrop of industrial-scale murder. It suggests that genocide, for some, became routine work, an administrative task to be completed before returning to an evening of music or a quiet family dinner. You sense the unsettling comfort found in the phrase, "Orders are orders," a shield meticulously crafted to deflect the searing heat of moral responsibility. It whispers through the air, a cold justification that allows human beings to disconnect their actions from their consciences. You realize, with a quiet shudder, that it wasn't always grand. Theatrical villains who orchestrated these atrocities. Often, it was simply conformity, a quiet yielding to instruction, a fear of standing out, that paved the path for what philosopher Hannah Arendt famously called the banality of evil. No monsters were required. You see, only the steady, unthinking adherence to a predetermined course. This descent into the unthinkable wasn't sudden. You can trace its origins to an early, systematic dehumanization, a gradual chipping away at the humanity of certain groups. It began with words, you recall, with whispers of difference, with the subtle painting of them as less than us. First, they were outsiders, then problems, then diseases, until finally, they ceased to be recognized as human beings at all in the eyes of their persecutors. You watch as this process unfolds, like a slow-motion tragedy, making mass murder not just possible, but tragically logical within its own twisted framework. It becomes a matter of efficiency, of cleansing, of solving a problem rather than extinguishing millions of individual lives. And this, you reflect, brings us to a quiet, yet searing truth: a society of bystanders enables atrocity. You sense the heavy weight of this realization. It's not just the active perpetrators, but the silent majority, the ones who avert their gaze, who choose not to question, who prioritize their own comfort or safety over intervention. You imagine their quiet complicity, the rustling of newspapers, the turned backs, the hushed conversations that failed to translate into action. Each flicker of indifference, each moment of silence, contributed to the horrifying momentum. It's a somber lesson. You feel that echoes softly through the corridors of time, reminding us of the profound power of collective inaction. You understand that the responsibility, in its quietest form, settles on us all to listen, to witness, and to never, ever look away. You might find yourself drawn to the image, a powerful visual that was, by design, incredibly seductive. Imagine the crispness of the black uniform, the sharp lines, the gleaming silver insignia that catches the light. You can almost feel the weight of the heavy wool, the polished leather of the boots. Hear the purposeful clack as they strike the pavement. The SS was marketed as an elite force, an exclusive brotherhood, offering not just status, but a profound sense of power. It was an image of discipline, strength, and unwavering purpose. A stark contrast to the economic uncertainty and societal upheaval that lingered in the air of post-World War I Germany. You observe how this carefully crafted facade, shimmering with prestige, beckoned to young men seeking a place, a meaning, in a world that often felt devoid of both. Consider the story of Harry Seidel, a young man, perhaps not so different from many others of his generation. You imagine him, impressionable and yearning, as he first encounters the vision of these men. He is dazzled. You feel, by the sheer image, the undeniable prestige. He sees not only the sharp uniforms, but the air of authority, the respectful nods, the quiet deference that follows these individuals wherever they go. In a society grappling with the aftershocks of a devastating war and a crippling economic crisis, the hyperinflation, the breadlines, the desperate scramble for work, the SS offered a perceived escape. It funneled countless youths, desperate for stability and a sense of direction, into its ranks. You can almost taste the desperation in the air, the gnawing hunger for a future, any future, that seemed to offer a measure of security. For these young men, often adrift and lacking opportunity, the combination of weapons and authority presented a uniquely seductive pathway to belonging. You might envision the feeling of a cold, solid rifle in your hands, the weight of a pistol at your hip, and the sudden, exhilarating rush of knowing you held power. Power that could enforce, power that could command. This physical manifestation of authority, coupled with the camaraderie of the group, forged a powerful bond. The SS presented itself as a surrogate family for the very young, for those who had perhaps lost their fathers in the Great War, or whose families had been fractured by poverty and despair. You hear the promises whispered in their ears: brotherhood, purpose, a place to belong, a cause to fight for. It resonated deeply with the universal human need for connection and significance. Recruitment, you understand, thrived not on ideology alone, but on more base human vulnerabilities, vanity, and a profound vacancy of purpose. You see the reflection in their eyes, a hunger for recognition, for a uniform that would make them stand out, for a title that would command respect, for those who felt insignificant, overlooked, or simply lost in the vastness of a changing world. The SS offered an identity, a clearly defined role within a powerful, ascendant movement. It provided a stark purpose, however twisted, filling the void left by a broken society. You can almost feel the gentle tug of belonging, the dangerous comfort of being part of something larger than yourself, even as that something began to cast a long, dark shadow over the world. It's a quiet reminder. you sense of how easily genuine human needs can be exploited, transformed into instruments of a devastating will. You step, in your mind's eye, into a grim and foreboding landscape, the very air thick with a sense of dread. This is Dachau, you observe, a name that echoes with a chilling significance. It wasn't just a camp, it was a deliberate template, a crucible for shaping brutality, serving simultaneously as a training ground for SS cadres and a site of systematic torture. You can almost feel the cold, damp stone of the barracks, hear the sharp, barking commands that echo across the parade grounds. Here, the targets of the regime's hatred were brought together: communists, the Romani and Sinti people, homosexuals, Jews, and any dissenters who dared to question the tightening grip of control. You sense the arbitrary nature of the suffering, the broad brushstrokes of a regime intent on silencing any voice that differed from its own. Within these stark walls, a horrifying curriculum was enacted. You observe the cadres, the young recruits, being meticulously conditioned to crush any vestiges of empathy they might harbor. It was a process, you realize, often achieved through shared abuse. They were forced to witness and then participate in acts of cruelty, gradually desensitized until the screams of others faded into a dull background noise. You can almost hear the mocking laughter, the taunts, the chilling silence of those who dared not object. Hesitation, you note, was branded as cowardice, a dangerous weakness in this new, brutal order. This label, delivered with harsh words and often physical retribution, compelled individuals to escalate their brutality, to prove their loyalty, to silence the faint whisper of their own conscience. You see how the fear of being perceived as weak became a powerful motivator, driving them deeper into the abyss of cruelty. Group violence, you realize, became a twisted form of bonding ritual. You imagine the shared grins, the knowing glances among the perpetrators, the sense of camaraderie forged not through shared acts of heroism, but through collective acts of degradation and pain inflicted upon others. It cemented their loyalty to each other, creating an insular world where the norms of human decency were not just suspended, but inverted. Within this perverse fraternity, loyalty was paid to the group, and the suffering of those outside its bounds became irrelevant, even gratifying. You witnessed the subtle shifts, the hardening of expressions, the growing ease with which they carried out their grim tasks. And then, you consider the symbol, the Totenkopf, the death's head, a skull and crossbones emblem that adorned their caps and uniforms. You feel the chilling power of this image. It was not merely a symbol of death, but, in their warped interpretation, a badge of pride. Cruelty, you understand, was not a regrettable necessity. It was an active virtue. It signaled their unwavering dedication, their ruthlessness, their commitment to the ideology, elevating barbarity into a perverse source of honor. You trace the insidious progression from fear to participation, from participation to acceptance, and finally, from acceptance to a grim pride in their own capacity for destruction. It's a quiet, harrowing journey, you observe, demonstrating the terrifying efficiency with which human compassion can be systematically dismantled and replaced by something utterly cold and without mercy. You sense the long shadow this process casts, a testament to the fragility of empathy when confronted with such calculated, sustained pressure. As you cast your gaze across the map of Europe after 1939, you perceive a chilling transformation. a creeping darkness begins to spread, like an ink stain across the continent. With the advent of war, the regime's control expanded, and with it, the scope of its persecution. Mass arrests and deportations swept across occupied Europe, a grim tide washing over villages and cities alike. You hear the distant rumble of train cars, the hurried shouts in the night, the wrenching cries of families torn apart. This was not a localized phenomenon. It was a vast, coordinated effort. Camps began to multiply, you note, their numbers growing exponentially, weaving a sprawling, continent-wide network of oppression and death. Each new conquest brought new populations under its dominion, and new requirements for control and containment. The purpose of these camps, you realize, underwent a profound and chilling shift. Initially, they served as prisons for political opponents. But as the war intensified, a colder, more utilitarian function emerged: slave labor. You envision vast factories, mines, and construction sites. Their workforces comprised of the emaciated bodies of prisoners, forced to toil under brutal conditions. Their very lives, their physical strength, became a resource to be exploited, feeding the insatiable maw of the war economy. You feel the weight of this exploitation, the quiet despair of those whose humanity was stripped away, leaving only their capacity for labor. Auschwitz, a name that resonates with profound sorrow, serves as a stark example of this evolution. You trace its grim progression from an initial military barracks. It metastasized, growing organically into a complex, sprawling death machine. What began as a detention center for Polish political prisoners gradually transformed, adding new sections, expanding its reach, until it became the most notorious of all extermination sites. You see the barracks multiply, the fences stretch, the gas chambers rise. Each new structure a testament to an ever-deepening depravity. It wasn't a static entity, but a living, growing organism designed for death. Across Europe, you tally the numbers, a staggering thought: over 1,000 main and subcamps. A vast archipelago of suffering, designed to imprison and, ultimately, to eliminate the national enemy. You feel the crushing weight of such a system, the sheer scale of its reach, locking in millions behind barbed wire and watchful eyes. Each camp, whether large or small, played its part in this vast, horrifying tapestry. And what connected these disparate nodes of suffering? A chillingly efficient bureaucracy and a vast network of railway lines. You visualize the endless trains, snaking across the landscape, carrying their human cargo towards an unimaginable fate. The meticulously kept schedules, the dispatch orders, the detailed ledgers, all elements of a cold, impersonal system designed to transport, to process, and ultimately, to destroy. Bureaucracy, you realize, became the invisible thread that knit together this continent-wide killing system, making the unthinkable possible through the guise of administrative efficiency. You sense the quiet hum of this machinery of death, a chilling testament to humanity's capacity for organized cruelty. You recall the summer of 1941 when the world held its breath as Operation Barbarossa roared to life. This was the invasion of the Soviet Union, a vast and brutal undertaking that marked a bloody turning point in the regime's genocidal ambitions. With the push eastward, a new, more immediate, and horrifying phase of mass murder began. You witness, in your mind's eye, the deployment of the Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing squads that swept through towns and villages in the wake of the advancing army. Their mission was clear and terrible: to systematically liquidate perceived enemies behind the front lines. In the first 6 months alone, you sense the unfathomable scale of their cruelty. Over 1 million lives extinguished, often by bullets, in forests and ravines, erased from existence with chilling efficiency. Among the many sights of unspeakable horror, Babin Yar stands as a stark and devastating testament. You imagine the ravine near Kiev, a natural landscape transformed into a mass grave. In just 2 horrifying days, you realize approximately 30,000 Jewish men, women, and children were systematically rounded up, marched to this desolate place, and shot. You hear the distant echoes of their last moments, the quiet despair, the brutal finality. It was an act of concentrated, unimaginable horror. The sheer volume of lives extinguished in such a compressed time frame, leaving an indelible scar upon the earth and upon the conscience of humanity. As you ponder the perpetrators, you discern a grim pattern of coping: the relentless brutality, the intimate nature of the killings, even for those indoctrinated in cruelty, took a psychological toll. You might imagine the bitter taste of schnapps, the acrid smoke of cigarettes, the desperate attempts to numb the senses with alcohol. Dark humor, crude and unsettling, became another shield, a perverse way to distance themselves from the monstrous reality of their actions. They told grim jokes. You sense, laughed at unspeakable things, anything to maintain the illusion of control, to push the horror of their deeds to the periphery of their minds. Yet, despite these crude mechanisms, you observe a chilling realization dawning upon the regime. The method of execution: mass shootings, proved to be both inefficient and, disturbingly, traumatizing for the shooters themselves. You hear the cold, detached analysis: bullets were costly, time-consuming, and the psychological impact on the men, while perhaps ignored for a time, eventually began to manifest in various forms of breakdown and reluctance. This was not a moral awakening, you understand, but a logistical problem, a matter of operational effectiveness. The solution was not to cease the killing, but to find a faster, more manageable method, one that would spare the perpetrators the perceived inconvenience of direct engagement. This cold, calculating assessment, you realize, led to the horrifying pivot, the turn toward a more industrialized form of death gas. It was a dark, chilling evolution, driven not by a glimmer of humanity, but by a chilling quest for greater, more impersonal efficiency in mass murder. You stand, in your mind's eye, before a vast and desolate landscape, a place etched forever into the memory of humanity. This is Auschwitz-Birkenau, the horrifying culmination of the regime's genocidal ambitions. Built from 1941 onward, you behold the immense scale, the bleak, sprawling barracks, the watchtowers casting long shadows over the flat, open fields. At its core, Birkenau was constructed with one terrifying purpose: mass extermination, centered around its infamous Zyklon B gas chambers. You sense the profound silence that hangs heavy in the air, a quiet dread that permeates every brick, every strand of barbed wire. The journey to Birkenau often began on a ramp, the point of arrival for countless trainloads of human beings. You imagine the chaos, the sudden disorientation after days crammed in cattle cars, the harsh shouts, the blinding light. Here, the terrible process of selection unfolded. You watch, with a quiet agony, as SS doctors, with a flick of a wrist or a casual gesture, decided fates to one side. Those deemed fit for slave labor, a temporary reprieve, a slow, agonizing death by overwork and starvation. To the other, those deemed immediately unfit, the elderly, the sick, young mothers with children, who were led directly to the gas chambers. You feel the cold, arbitrary cruelty of these moments, the agonizing uncertainty, the finality of a single, dismissive motion. To maintain this machinery of terror, a perverse system of coercion was employed. You observe the functional prisoners, often called capos or sonderkommandos, who were forced into assisting their tormentors. These were individuals caught in an impossible bind, often brutalized themselves, now coerced into enforcing the will of the SS, participating in the very system that sought to destroy them. You sense the immense moral weight of their impossible choices, the profound psychological scars they carried, forever tainted by their forced complicity. Their survival, you realize, was predicated on their participation in the terror. And then, you hear it, the incongruous sound of music. The Auschwitz Orchestra, comprised of prisoner musicians, would play marches as work columns departed for their grueling shifts and returned exhausted to the camp. You feel the chilling contrast, the bizarre juxtaposition of artistic expression against the backdrop of unimaginable suffering. This was not for entertainment, you understand, but a cruel mockery, a rhythm imposed upon the routines of forced labor and death. For the musicians, it was a survival calculus, a momentary reprieve, a terrifying privilege that set them apart, yet bound them inexorably to the horror. Within the camp, a ruthless hierarchy was established, deliberately weaponizing scarcity and fear. You perceive the constant struggle for the smallest morsel of food, the thinnest blanket, the most meager advantage. Prisoners were pitted against each other, their humanity further eroded by the desperate fight for survival. Hope and despair were manipulated with chilling precision, used as tools to control, to break the will, to ensure compliance. You see how every workflow, every single aspect of daily life within the camp, was meticulously optimized around one central, horrifying purpose: death. From the arrival of the trains to the meticulous accounting of possessions, every step was a component in this vast, impersonal system of extermination. You sense the cold, mechanical hum of this machinery, a stark testament to humanity's capacity for organized, industrialized cruelty, all focused on the eradication of human life. You turn your attention now to another, equally chilling chapter, a focused and brutal phase known as Action Reinhardt. This was a secret operation, you realize, executed under the command of SS General Odilo Globoknik, and it represented an intensification, a terrifying acceleration of the regime's genocidal goals. Its primary purpose was absolute extermination. You whisper the names of the three main camps at its heart: Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. Unlike Auschwitz, these were not designed with the pretense of slave labor. There were no factories, no long work shifts, no gradual wasting away. At these sites, you understand, arrival equaled death. From the moment the train stopped, the horrifying machinery of destruction was set in motion, with no pretense of selection or reprieve. Within a mere 21 months, between 1942 and 1943, Action Reinhardt accounted for the murder of approximately 1.8 million people, almost exclusively Jews, primarily from Poland. You try to grasp the enormity of this number. The sheer volume of lives extinguished in such a compressed time frame. A figure that continues to echo through the corridors of history. You imagine the relentless arrival of the trains, the terror of disembarking, the immediate ushering into the gas chambers, the quiet, horrifying efficiency of a system designed for nothing less than complete annihilation. Amidst this overwhelming darkness, flickers of desperate courage illuminated the landscape. You recall the Warsaw Ghetto, a vast, walled-off section of the city where over 400,000 Jews had been confined. In 1943, facing the final liquidation of the ghetto, a small, ill-equipped group of Jewish fighters launched a doomed, yet iconic, uprising. You sense their defiant spirit, their decision to resist against impossible odds, to choose how they would die. You can almost smell the smoke, hear the distant gunfire, feel the quiet resolve of those who refuse to go quietly. Though ultimately crushed, their resistance became a powerful symbol, a testament to the indomitable human spirit. These acts of desperate agency were not isolated incidents. You note the revolts that occurred at Treblinka and Sobibor, death camps designed for immediate mass murder. These were uprisings born of unimaginable desperation, moments when prisoners, knowing their fate was sealed, chose to fight back, to destroy elements of the killing machinery, and to make a desperate dash for freedom. You envision the chaos, the brief, furious struggle against heavily armed guards, the sheer audacity of their rebellion. Many perished, but some, miraculously, escaped, carrying their stories, their testimonies, out into the world. Even in their ultimate suppression, you realize these acts of resistance became enduring testimony. They proved that even in the face of absolute power and overwhelming horror, the human spirit, however fragile, could still muster defiance. You sense the profound echoes of these revolts, reminding us that even in the darkest corners of human history, the spark of resistance, however small, can ignite a beacon of hope and remembrance. It is a quiet, powerful reminder that humanity, even under the most brutal oppression, holds a deep-seated desire for dignity and freedom. You find yourself peering into a profound and unsettling duality. The chilling schism between unspeakable acts and the mundane rhythms of everyday life. Consider the diary of SS Dr. Johann Paul Kramer, a chilling artifact from this dark period. You imagine the scratch of his pen, the quiet thoughts committed to paper. By day, he presided over horrific killings, actively participating in the regime's machinery of death. But by night, his entries reveal a startling contrast: concerts, social gatherings, quiet evenings with friends, even jovial roasts. You sense the bizarre comfort he found in these ordinary activities, the ability to compartmentalize, to separate his brutal duties from his personal leisure. It presents a terrifying portrait of a mind capable of inhabiting two utterly different moral universes. Another poignant example of this unsettling blend of culture and cruelty emerges with Dr. Josef Mengele, the infamous angel of death at Auschwitz. You imagine him, a figure synonymous with medical barbarity, yet possessing a refined appreciation for music. He would often demand Schumann, the exquisite romantic melodies, from the prisoner musicians of the camp orchestra. You feel the profound incongruity of such a request, the chilling juxtaposition of beautiful art and extreme cruelty. It wasn't an act of mercy, but a perverse exercise of power. forcing victims to provide aesthetic pleasure to their tormentor, further highlighting the moral void that allowed such contradictions to coexist. The horror, you realize, was not exclusively a male domain. You consider the role of female guards, figures like Maria Mandel, who often proved to be exceptionally brutal. You feel the quiet shock of this observation, challenging any preconceived notions of gender and cruelty. These women, entrusted with authority, often wielded it with a viciousness that matched or even exceeded their male counterparts. Their cruelty was not an exception, but a disturbing reality, demonstrating that depravity knew no gender boundaries. Ravensbrück, a women's concentration camp, serves as a particularly grim testament to this. You observe its stark confines, a site where not only female prisoners suffered, but where female guards received their training in cruelty. Here, torture was not just practiced, it was ritualized, systematized, and integrated into the daily routine. You sense the oppressive atmosphere, the constant fear, the methodical degradation. It was a place where human dignity was systematically dismantled, and where the line between duty and sadism blurred beyond recognition. For many perpetrators, you discern, violence was normalized, reduced to just a job. You imagine the quiet internal monologue, the detachment from the human cost of their actions. It was a task, a role, a routine to be followed, devoid of emotional resonance. This psychological distancing, you realize, was crucial to sustaining the horrific work. It led to a profound moral inversion, where traditional ethical frameworks were turned upside down. Duty was no longer owed to universal human values, but only to fellow Germans, to the regime's twisted ideology. You sense the chilling echo of this twisted logic, a quiet reminder of how easily conscience can be warped when loyalty to a destructive cause supersedes all other moral obligations. You ponder a truly insidious betrayal, one that strikes at the very heart of trust and healing the perversion of medicine. You consider the figure of SS physician Karl Gebhardt, a man whose professional oath, meant for the preservation of life, was twisted into an instrument of unspeakable suffering. You feel the cold dread as you recall his infamous sulfonamide experiments. These were not acts of medical inquiry, you understand, but deliberate, systematic inflictions of pain and disease, conducted upon living human beings. Imagine the sterile coldness of a laboratory, its tools of healing now repurposed for horror, its white walls stained with the quiet despair of its victims. The cruelty was meticulous, scientific in its method, yet utterly devoid of ethics. Gebhardt and his team would deliberately infect wounds, often introducing foreign materials like wood or cloth splinters, or even glass shards, into the bodies of prisoners. You feel the quiet horror of this, the intentional causation of agonizing infections, the methodical denial of treatment, all to observe the agonizing progression of suffering. It was a grotesque parody of research, a calculated infliction of agony designed not to alleviate suffering, but to document it, to witness its ravages. You hear the hushed whispers of pain, the quiet cries for help that went unanswered. Adding another layer to this horror, you learn of secret photographs that were taken, documenting these abominable experiments. You envision these images, silent witnesses to unspeakable suffering, capturing the maimed bodies, the festering wounds, the anguished outcomes of this twisted pseudoscience. These photographs, you realize, were not intended for public viewing, but for internal documentation, chilling evidence of a depraved agenda, preserved in the cold, unfeeling light of a camera's lens. They serve as a stark, visual testament to a profound violation of human dignity. This was pseudoscience, you understand, driven entirely by power and ideology, not by a genuine quest for discovery or knowledge. You perceive the empty pretense of scientific rigor, the cold, detached observations masking a profound moral bankruptcy. There was no true scientific benefit, only the assertion of dominance, the cruel demonstration of absolute control over the human body and spirit. Institutional medicine, once a bastion of healing and compassion, was systematically co-opted, its methods and prestige lent to cruelty. You feel the weight of this betrayal, the quiet horror of an entire profession turning its back on its most fundamental principles. Science, you conclude with a heavy heart, became another arm of the regime. Its intellectual prowess, its rigorous methodology, its veneer of objectivity, were all bent to the will of a brutal ideology. You see how reason was corrupted, knowledge weaponized, and the very pursuit of understanding transformed into an instrument of torture and death. It's a profound, quiet warning you sense, echoing through time, reminding us of the fragility of ethical boundaries when confronted with unchecked power and the systematic dehumanization of others. The quiet, devastating realization is that even the noblest human endeavors can be twisted into tools of immense destruction. As the tide of war began to turn in 1944 and 1945, you witnessed the desperate, final acts of a collapsing regime, facing the inevitable advance of Allied forces. The perpetrators embarked on a chilling campaign to erase all evidence of their crimes and to kill the remaining survivors. These were the death marches, forced evacuations from concentration camps in the East, driving prisoners westward through the bitter cold, often on foot, with little food or water. You imagine the frozen earth beneath their weary feet, the biting wind, the constant threat of a bullet for those who faltered. It was a final, cruel attempt to conceal the truth, a last, agonizing infliction of suffering upon those who had already endured so much. One name that resonates with the horror of this endgame is Bergen-Belsen. You recall its grim reality, a camp liberated by British forces in April 1945, revealing a scene of unimaginable devastation. Tens of thousands of unburied bodies lay scattered, victims of starvation, typhus, and other diseases that had ravaged the overcrowded, unsanitary conditions. You sense the overwhelming stench, the cries of the dying, the profound silence of those who had already succumbed. It was a scene that shocked the world, a stark testament to the depths of human cruelty and the sheer scale of the suffering that had been inflicted. Amidst the chaos and devastation of liberation, voices began to emerge, fragile yet powerful, to bear witness. You hear the story of Anita Lasker, a cellist and survivor of Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen, who spoke on the BBC almost immediately after her liberation. Her words, clear and unwavering, cut through the shock and confusion, offering a direct, personal account of the horrors she had endured. You feel the profound courage of her testimony, a quiet act of defiance against the regime's attempt to silence and erase. Her voice, among countless others, became a beacon of truth in a world grappling with the enormity of what had occurred. In the aftermath, the world grappled with the monumental task of seeking justice. You observed the trials that followed, the Nuremberg proceedings and countless others, where perpetrators like Karl Gebhardt and Maria Mandel were brought before tribunals, condemned for their heinous crimes and some were executed. You sense the solemn weight of these proceedings, the desperate attempt to hold individuals accountable. Yet, the scale of the atrocity was so vast, and the number of participants so immense, that true justice proved elusive. A sobering truth emerges: an estimated 90% of SS perpetrators ultimately went unpunished, fading back into society, their crimes often unacknowledged. You feel the lingering shadow of this quiet injustice, a testament to the limitations of retribution in the face of such widespread evil. The lesson, you conclude, is a profound and enduring one, echoing softly through the annals of time. Genocide thrives not just when evil men act, but when societies look away. You realize that collective indifference, the quiet turning of heads, or, more insidiously, when elements within a society actively benefit from the persecution of others, creates fertile ground for atrocity. It is a quiet, yet powerful call to remembrance, a solemn injunction to never forget, to remain vigilant, and to continually challenge the quiet complicity that can allow such darkness to take root. You sense the fragility of peace, the constant need for empathy, and the enduring responsibility we carry to speak out against injustice, ensuring that such a tragedy is never allowed to unfold again. Let this quiet reflection settle with you, a gentle reminder of the lessons that history, in its quiet wisdom, forever imparts.